The day my sister crouched down to my daughter's level and told her that her mother had wasted her potential, Maya was 12 years old. She said it in Renee's kitchen, standing between the island and the refrigerator, with her hand on Maya's shoulder like a woman delivering difficult news gently. I was in the hallway. 3 feet of drywall between us. I heard every syllable. I know it seems like your mom is doing what she loves, Renee said, but sometimes the people who love us make choices that hurt everyone around them, not just themselves. Your grandmother always said your mom could have been something remarkable. It's just a shame, the way things turned out. My daughter said nothing. I know this because I was counting my own heartbeats in that hallway, listening for Maya's voice, and there was only silence on her end. The silence of a child who doesn't know what to do when someone she trusts says something that doesn't feel right but comes wrapped in concern. I walked to the bathroom down the hall and turned on the tap. I filled a glass of water and stood there until I heard the kitchen conversation move on to homework schedules and Renee's older daughter's violin recital. Then I walked back in and said nothing. I didn't correct her. I didn't defend myself. I reached for a dish towel and dried my hands and asked if anyone wanted more iced tea. That was 4 years before Christmas Eve in the Marsh living room, when a sealed letter changed every single thing Renee believed she had built. If you're already feeling something in that, I want you to hit like and subscribe, but only if this story genuinely speaks to you. Drop a comment and tell me where in the world you're watching from. I love knowing who's out there listening. Now let me take you back to the beginning, because you cannot understand what that letter meant without understanding what 4 years of silence actually costs. My name is Camille Donahue. I'm 39 years old. I have 2 daughters, Maya, who is now 16, and Lily, who is now 13. I have a mortgage on a narrow craftsman house on Birch Street in Haverton, a town with 1 decent grocery store, a library that smells like old carpet and good intentions, and the kind of neighbors who still wave from driveways in November. I drive a 7-year-old Subaru with a crack in the rear bumper from a parking lot incident I've never once bothered to fix. I have a manuscript that took 4 years to write and an acceptance letter from Aldrich Press sitting on my kitchen counter that I've read 11 times since it arrived on a Tuesday morning that started out like any other Tuesday. And I have a sister who spent 4 years telling my children I was a failure, convinced she was doing it out of love, convinced she was delivering concern and not damage, convinced above all that I would never have the means or the standing to answer her. She was wrong about the last part. Our grandmother made sure of that. I need to start with Nana Rose, because without her, none of what follows makes sense. Margaret Rose Donahue was 78 years old when she died on a February morning 4 winters ago. She had blue-gray eyes that looked silver in certain light, and she smelled like lavender and black coffee, and she had a habit of folding her hands in her lap when she was thinking something she wasn't yet ready to say aloud. She was not a sentimental woman in the greeting card sense. She didn't cry at films. She didn't keep dried flowers in vases past the point of recognizability. What she kept were opinions, held close and aimed carefully, and a particular kind of affection for the people she believed were quietly carrying more weight than they admitted to. She and I were alike in that way. Renee always said so, usually as a criticism wrapped in the language of observation. You two are so similar, she'd say at family dinners, setting down her wine glass just so. Always a little too alike. As if resembling Nana Rose was a liability to be managed rather than something to be grateful for. Renee Donahue Marsh is 42 years old. She married Derek Marsh 11 years ago at a venue outside Covendale, 140 guests, calla lilies, an open bar that ran until 11, and a photographer whose day rate exceeded my monthly car payment. Derek is a financial advisor at a firm that manages portfolios for people who never have to think about their portfolios. He is not a bad man. He is a man who prefers peace at almost any cost and has spent 11 years choosing Renee's version of events over any version that might require an uncomfortable conversation. They live in a 5-bedroom colonial in the Ashwood development. Their children, Cooper, now 14, and Brianna, now 11, attend Halcyon Academy on the other side of Haverton, the private school with the climbing wall and the Latin elective and the annual giving campaign that Renee co-chairs. She is the person other parents call when something needs to be organized. She is genuinely capable and genuinely effective, and the tragedy of Renee is not that she is cruel but that she is so completely certain she is kind. My marriage ended 6 years ago. I won't say my ex-husband's name because he is a decent man who has been a good and present father in the years since, and this story was never about him. What I will say is that the divorce was my choice, that it cost more than I anticipated, and that the two things I carried out of it that mattered most were Maya and Lily, and the quiet, clarifying knowledge that I had spent 8 years living inside someone else's blueprint for a good life. I had been marketing director at Creston Communications for nearly a decade when the marriage ended. The salary was significant. The title impressed people at dinner parties. I was exceptionally good at the job. I also had not written a true sentence in 4 years. This matters because writing is the thing. Not a hobby, not a secondary passion I picked up for enrichment. It is the practice that makes the rest of my life legible to me. I have known this since I was 9 years old, filling a green notebook on my bedroom floor with stories about people I invented because I needed somewhere to put what I was observing. I spent my entire adult life arranging everything around it except the time to do it. When Maya was 10 and Lily was 7 and the divorce had settled enough for me to see clearly, I made a decision. I left Creston. I began consulting part-time, enough to keep the mortgage current and the heat on, and I started writing a book. A non-fiction narrative about 3 women in a single town across 4 generations, the decisions they made under duress, the stories they carried for years without telling anyone. It was drawn from real lives. It took everything I had. I told almost no one about it, because I could not afford the weight of other people's doubt while I was still building enough certainty to carry my own. Renee knew I was writing. I'd told her in the first year, briefly, at a family dinner when she asked what I was working on. Her response, delivered with the precise warmth of someone who has learned how to decline things without using the word no, was, "That's wonderful, Camille, but have you thought about returning to something more stable? The girls are getting older." I thanked her and did not bring the book up again. What I hadn't understood then was that the absence of information from me was not protection. Renee filled the silence with her own story, and she told it to my daughters in the accumulated weight of small, concerned observations delivered over years, in rooms where I wasn't standing. I know this because Maya told me. Not immediately. Maya is perceptive in the particular way of children who grew up watching adults manage difficult situations by pretending they weren't difficult. She notices things. She files them. She told me on a Thursday afternoon when she was 14, sitting at the kitchen table with her backpack still on both shoulders, that Aunt Renee had said something at Thanksgiving that she'd been thinking about for 2 days straight and didn't know what to do with. She told me your book was probably never going anywhere, Mom. Maya's voice was measured, the voice of a person delivering a report and watching carefully for how it lands. And that Grandma Rose always felt like you'd never found your footing. And that it would be okay if you were just realistic about the consulting and stopped chasing something that wasn't coming. She paused. I don't think Grandma Rose actually felt that way. But Aunt Renee said she did. I looked at my daughter. Her backpack straps were still on both shoulders. She was watching me the way children watch a parent when they're trying to determine if the adult can handle the truth without the child having to manage the adult's response to it. I nodded. Thank you for telling me. She waited. That's all? That's what I needed to know. Maya slid off her chair and went to her room. She didn't ask me to elaborate. She trusted that the explanation would come when it was ready, which is the particular gift of a child who has watched you hold hard things with your hands steady and your mouth closed. That night I went through everything I remembered from the previous 4 years with the same systematic attention I used to bring to campaign audits. I counted incidents the way you count stitches on a wound, not to dramatize but to understand the full scope of the damage. Renee had mentioned my finances to Maya and Lily on at least 3 occasions I could trace. She had raised her eyebrows once at a family birthday gathering when my mother mentioned that I was still consulting, still working on the book, still figuring things out, still, always still, as if motion only counted when it arrived in a form Renee recognized. She had volunteered to help me financially on 3 separate occasions, each one in front of my children, not privately in a phone call, not quietly at the door, but in front of Maya and Lily, with the careful visibility of a person who wants to be seen making a generous offer they know the other person cannot accept without humiliation. "I can cover the girls' summer camp if things get tight," Renee had said at a 4th of July cookout, Lily standing 3 feet away. "I know you've been stretched since Creston." Lily had looked at me immediately. I'd said no thank you and changed the subject, and I'd held that moment in my chest for a week afterward, not with anger but with the specific grief of knowing your child has just been shown a portrait of you that isn't accurate and you cannot correct it without making it the largest thing in the room. I did not tell Renee to stop. "I want to be honest about that, because the question you're likely sitting with right now is, why didn't you say something?" And the answer has layers that aren't satisfying but are true. The first is that I didn't have documentation. I had what Maya told me, and what I could reconstruct, but I hadn't sat in those rooms. The second is that Renee is skilled. She would have reframed every example as concern. She would have cried with the specific credibility of a person who has never been told her emotions are a performance. She would have turned to Derek and to my mother and to Aunt Patricia, who drives 3 hours from Coverton to every family gathering and loves Renee the way certain relatives love the child who performs best for company, and she would have built a persuasive case that I was attacking her for loving me. Half the room would have believed her, because Renee is not cartoonishly cruel. She is a woman with a genuine need to be perceived as the one who holds things together, and she has learned to exercise that need on other people without asking their permission. The third layer is Nana Rose. 1 week before she died, I drove to the care facility on Meadow Road and sat with her for 3 hours. I brought black coffee and the Sunday crossword even though her hands could only manage a few clues before they tired. We spent most of that afternoon in the comfortable silence of 2 people who don't need to fill the space between them with noise. Near the end of the visit, she reached over and held my hand. Her grip was still firm. She said, "There is a letter, Camille. My attorney, Mr. Fielding. It's sealed. He'll bring it when the time is right." She looked at me with those silver eyes. "Don't explain yourself until the room is ready to hear it." I didn't ask what she meant. I know that must seem strange. But Nana Rose built sentences the way a careful person builds anything, with intention and precision, and when she said "don't explain yourself until the room is ready," I understood she had arranged something I hadn't yet earned the right to know. She passed 8 days later. At the funeral, Renee stood at the front of the church and delivered the eulogy. It was genuinely beautiful. She described Nana Rose as the anchor of this family, a woman who gave everything without asking what she'd receive in return. Her voice broke in the right places. She wore Nana Rose's pearl necklace, which had been given to her some years earlier, and it caught the light the way Renee always found a way to catch the light. I sat in the 3rd row with Maya on one side and Lily on the other, holding both of their hands, thinking about a sealed letter and what "don't speak until the room is ready" meant in terms of years. It meant 4 more. I could do 4 more years. I had been doing this my whole life. The years after Nana Rose's death had a particular density to them. Not terrible and not triumphant, just full. Full of work, of raising 2 daughters on my own, of the slow and frequently frustrating progress of a book I rewrote in significant sections 3 times before I trusted that it was what I meant it to be. I marked every mortgage payment with a small check mark in a notebook I kept in my desk drawer. 64 check marks by the time the acceptance letter arrived. Not one came from Renee's offer. Not one from Derek. Not one from anyone who had suggested I reconsider the path I was on. They came from me, from the consulting contracts I managed, from the evenings I wrote after the girls went to sleep, from the Saturday mornings when the house was empty and the document was open and the only sound was the radiator and my own thinking. The hardest year was the 3rd. Maya was 15 and moving through the specific private suffering of being 15, which requires a quality of emotional presence from a parent that is not easily compatible with also being in the difficult middle of a book. I wrote badly for 6 months. I deleted nearly 40 pages of a chapter I'd spent 8 weeks building. I sat at my kitchen table on a Tuesday night in February, both daughters asleep, a mug of tea gone cold in front of me, and I looked at the question honestly. Was this the point where I admitted the book wasn't going to be the thing I believed it was? I stayed with the question for 40 minutes. Then I opened the document and started again. The Christmas Eve I want to tell you about was the worst gathering before everything changed. Our family celebrated at Renee and Derek's house every year without exception. Renee organized it with the thoroughness of a person who understands that whoever controls the setting controls the story. 14-foot tree in the entry hall. White lights. A winter theme carried through every surface with the consistency of someone who has genuinely thought about it since October. A catered spread, a signature cocktail with a handwritten recipe card, and at some point in the evening a house tour for someone who hadn't seen the renovation they'd finished that fall. That year Maya was 15 and Lily was 12. Derek's parents had come from Hilton Head and Aunt Patricia had driven from Coverton, and the house had that high-energy warmth of an occasion where everything looks correct and everyone is performing a few degrees above their baseline. Near 9 o'clock I came back from the kitchen and found Renee in the corner of the living room with both of my daughters and Aunt Patricia. Lily was perched on the arm of the sofa. Maya was standing with her arms crossed in the way she stands when she's uncomfortable but is managing it. Renee had her hand on Aunt Patricia's arm and was saying something in the lowered voice that lifts when it reaches the important part. Grandma Rose had such high hopes for both her lines. She always said she wanted her grandchildren to have real security. She glanced at Maya. Not everyone gets to choose passion over stability, and that's perfectly okay. It takes a particular kind of courage to be realistic about what's possible. She smiled. Aunt Patricia nodded with the expression of a woman who is not malicious but is susceptible to a well-delivered narrative. Maya was looking at the floor. Lily looked up and saw me in the doorway. Mom. Renee turned. Her expression shifted for exactly 1 second, a quick recalibration, then settled back. Camille, perfect timing. We were just saying how wonderful it is that the girls have such a grounded home environment, despite everything. It was delivered as an invitation to agree with her. I held my wine glass and I smiled and I said yes, we're very lucky, and I stayed for 30 more minutes and drove home and put my daughters to bed and sat on the edge of my own bed in the dark and gave myself 12 minutes to feel everything before I put it back where I kept it. Sealed. Dated. Held for the right moment. 4 months later, in April of the following year, Martin Fielding called. He was Nana Rose's attorney, a quiet and precise man in his late 60s who had managed her affairs for 3 decades. He said he'd be in touch as the 4th anniversary approached. He wanted to confirm my contact information hadn't changed. I confirmed it. He thanked me and said, in the careful tone of a man who has read what he is holding and understands its weight, "Your grandmother was very specific about her instructions, Ms. Donahue. I think you'll find the occasion meaningful." I thanked him and stayed at the kitchen counter for a long time after the call ended. The manuscript was in its final revision. The letter was 8 months away from being read aloud. I submitted the final draft to Aldrich Press in September. I told no one in my family. I had dinner with Josephine, a friend from my Creston years who had watched me leave the job and the marriage and the version of myself I used to perform for other people, and over shared pasta and a good Chianti I told her what I'd submitted. She grabbed both of my hands across the table and held them hard. She said, "You've been building this whole time and none of them could see it." I told her that was exactly the point. The acceptance letter arrived on the first Tuesday in December. I read it standing at the counter in my coat, hands still cold from the walk from the car, the paper warm from the envelope. For a moment I just held it without reading it, the way you hold something when you already know the inside of it is going to change the structure of the day. Then I read it. Then I read it a second time. Then I called Josephine. She answered on the second ring. I said, "They took it." She was silent for 4 seconds, and then she made a sound I'd never heard from an adult before, somewhere between a sob and something much larger than a sob, and then she said, "Get in your car and come here right now." I told her I had to pick up the girls. She said, "Bring them." So I picked up Maya and Lily from school and drove to Josephine's apartment, and she had already opened champagne by the time we arrived, and she poured the girls sparkling cider in wine glasses and made a toast I won't repeat here because it belongs to us. But when she finished, Lily looked at me with her serious brown eyes and said, "Mom." I knew. And I believed her without needing to ask what she meant. Christmas Eve was 3 weeks away. In the 3 weeks between the acceptance letter and Christmas Eve, I did 2 things that nobody in my family knew about. The first was that I called Martin Fielding the morning after Aldrich Press said yes and told him the book had been acquired. He received this the way he received most information, with a brief silence and then a measured acknowledgement. He said, "Your grandmother anticipated this." I didn't ask what he meant by that yet. The second thing I did was drive to Fielding's office on a Wednesday afternoon and sit across from him at his desk and learn, for the first time in 4 years, what the letter actually contained. He was not legally required to tell me in advance. I did not ask him to read it to me. What I asked was a single question: does it require my presence to be effective? He looked at me over his reading glasses for a long moment. He said, "Your grandmother required the presence of the immediate family. She was very specific. She wanted everyone in the same room." I nodded. He leaned back in his chair and folded his hands. "Ms. Donahue, your grandmother came to this office 14 months before she passed. She was sharp and she was deliberate and she had clearly thought about this for some time. She did not want you to walk into that room alone and unprepared." He paused. "So I will tell you this much, the letter is not a surprise to you. It is a confirmation of what you already know to be true. It is the documentation of it that will be new to everyone else." I drove home and sat in my car in the driveway for a while. The girls were at their father's for the week. The house was quiet in the specific way it gets quiet when your children are elsewhere and the rooms hold the echo of them. I thought about Nana Rose sitting across from Martin Fielding 14 months before she died, clear-eyed and deliberate, building something on my behalf in a room where no one else could interfere. She had done it without telling me. She had done it knowing I would not ask for it. She had done it because she understood something I had only recently allowed myself to fully believe, that being the quiet one in a loud family is not the same as being wrong. I did not tell my daughters about the letter. I came close once, on a Sunday evening when Maya and I were doing dishes side by side, and she asked, without looking at me, whether I was nervous about Christmas Eve. I told her I wasn't nervous. She considered this. She said, "Aunt Renee told Lily last week that she hopes you're in a better place this year. Less stressed. That she worries about you." Maya's voice was neutral, the way it gets when she's reporting something that doesn't sit right, but she wants me to have the information before she offers her opinion of it. I handed her a bowl to dry. "What did Lily say?" She said, "Mom's not stressed, she's working." Maya allowed herself a small, private smile. And then she said Aunt Renee did that thing where she tilts her head. I laughed. It was the first real laugh I'd had in several days, and it caught us both off guard. We finished the dishes and didn't talk about Renee again that evening. But I noticed that when Lily went to bed she paused in the hallway and said, "Hey Mom, I think your book is going to be really good. Just so you know." She said it to the wall, not to me, and then she went into her room and closed the door, and I stood in the kitchen holding a dish towel thinking about what it means to be known by your children, truly known, in the way that has nothing to do with what you've accomplished and everything to do with who you were while you were trying. Renee sent the Christmas Eve itinerary on the 14th of December. I know she sent it to me because I was on the family group text, not because she believed I'd find it useful. The itinerary had a start time of 5:30, a dinner seating at 7, a dessert and gift exchange at 8:30, and a notation at the bottom, typed in Renee's clean, sans serif font, that she'd arranged for a string quartet for the first hour. A string quartet. In her living room. On a Wednesday night. I showed it to Josephine over the phone, reading it aloud, and she said, "She's performing." I said, "She always is." Josephine said, "The difference is this time you know the final act." She was right, but knowing the final act doesn't make the earlier scenes easier to sit through. It just means you know that the discomfort has a shape and the shape has an end. I called my mother, Carol, the week before Christmas. My mother is 66 and lives 20 minutes from Haverton in the house where Renee and I grew up. She is not malicious. She is a woman who spent 40 years smoothing surfaces and has come to mistake smoothness for peace. She loved Renee more visibly, which is not the same as loving me less, but which has the same effect on a child's understanding of their own worth. I called her to confirm she was coming Christmas Eve and to ask, as simply as I could, whether she knew anything about Nana Rose's attorney attending. My mother went quiet in a way that told me she did not. She said, "Why would Martin Fielding be at Christmas Eve?" I said, "Nana Rose's instructions." Mom went very still on the phone. I could hear her breathing. She said, "What instructions?" I said, "I think we should all be in the room together when it comes out." She started to say something and then didn't. I said, "Mom, I need you to trust me for one more week." A long pause. Then, quietly, "All right, Camille. I love you. I love you too." It was the most uncomplicated exchange we'd had in years. I think we both knew it. Christmas Eve arrived the way Christmas Eve always does in a family that has complicated feelings about itself, with too much preparation and too little honesty and the particular tension of people who are about to spend hours performing warmth in a room where warmth is not the operative emotion. I dressed carefully. Dark green wrap dress, my grandmother's small pearl earrings, which my mother had given me after the funeral without any comment and which I had never worn in front of Renee until that night. My daughters were with me. Maya wore a navy blouse and black slacks and looked exactly like a person who has decided to carry herself with intention, which made me quietly proud. Lily wore a red dress she'd picked herself and had her hair in a braid that she'd done 3 times before she was satisfied. We pulled into the marsh driveway at 5:34. Renee's house was lit from every window. I could see through the glass the shape of the Christmas tree, 14 feet of it, perfect as it always was, and the warm movement of people already inside, and the pale gold light that Renee arranges for these occasions with the same precision she brings to everything else. I sat in the car for a moment. Maya looked at me from the passenger seat. "You ready?" I told her the truth. I've been ready for 4 years. She didn't ask what I meant. She just nodded and opened the door. Renee received us at the entrance with the particular embrace that she reserves for occasions she has organized, the embrace that says I am the reason this beauty exists and you are welcome inside it. She hugged the girls first, held them both at once, told Lily her braid was gorgeous, told Maya she'd grown, and then turned to me with the warm, slightly measured smile she uses when she wants to convey affection without losing ground. "You look nice," she said. I told her the house looked beautiful, which was true, because Renee's house on Christmas Eve is genuinely beautiful, and I have never found it useful to pretend otherwise. She took our coats. Derek appeared and shook my hand with the hearty cheerfulness of a man who has prepared himself for an uncomplicated evening. Aunt Patricia was already seated near the fireplace with a glass of red wine, and she raised it at me in greeting, and I crossed the room and kissed her cheek and she said, "You look well, Camille, really." I thanked her. The string quartet was in the corner of the dining room, for young musicians playing something measured and elegant that gave the evening a texture of formality it didn't quite earn. My mother arrived 20 minutes later. She came to me first, which she almost never does, and she held my face in both hands for a moment and looked at me without saying anything. Then she said, "You're wearing Mother's earrings." I told her I thought tonight was the right occasion. She exhaled something that was almost a laugh. She went to find a seat near the fireplace. Renee held the room the way she always holds rooms, by constant, calibrated motion. She moved between guests with refilled glasses and compliments and the particular skill of a woman who has trained herself to make every person feel attended to without giving any one person her full attention. She introduced me to Derek's colleague from the firm and his wife with the phrase, "This is my sister, she's a writer, she's been working on something." The qualifier in that sentence, "been working on," is a small thing. It implies incompletion. It implies ongoing effort without a rival. It places me in the category of people still trying rather than people who have done. I noticed it. I let it go. I would not have to let it go for much longer. At 6:58, the doorbell rang. Martin Fielding is 68 years old. He is not a tall man and not an imposing one in any conventional sense. He wears glasses on a cord around his neck and carries a weathered briefcase that he has clearly owned for decades and has no intention of replacing. He was wearing a dark suit and a green tie, and he stood at Renee's front door with the particular stillness of a man who is accustomed to entering rooms that are about to change. Renee answered the door herself. I watched her face process the information: an older man she didn't recognize, a briefcase, a formal expression. Can I help you? Martin Fielding introduced himself. He said he was the attorney for the estate of Margaret Rose Donahue and that he had standing instructions to attend the first Christmas Eve family gathering following the 4th anniversary of her death, which this was, and that he had a document to be read in the presence of the immediate family per the explicit written instructions of his client. Renee stared at him. Her hostess' composure did not break, but it went very still, the way water goes still just before something surfaces beneath it. She turned and looked across the room and found me. I met her eyes. I had been watching the door. She looked at me for exactly 2 seconds, and in those 2 seconds I watched something move across her face that I had never seen there before. It was not guilt, not yet. It was the first understanding that the evening had an architecture she had not designed. She let Martin Fielding in. Derek came forward and shook his hand and offered him a seat at the dining table with the automatic hospitality of a man managing a situation he doesn't yet understand. The string quartet, reading the shift in the room, let their current piece finish and did not begin another. The silence that followed was the loudest thing in the house. Renee gathered the family. She did it efficiently, because efficiency is how she manages uncertainty, and within 4 minutes the immediate family was seated or standing around the dining table: Derek, Cooper, Brianna, my mother, Aunt Patricia, Maya, Lily, Renee, and me. Martin Fielding placed his briefcase on the table and withdrew a sealed envelope. The envelope was cream-colored and substantial and had been sealed with wax, Nana Rose's particular touch, dark green wax with the impression of a small flower that was her grandmother's ring, the one she wore on her right hand every day of her life. Martin Fielding did not make a speech. He said, Margaret Rose Donahue prepared this letter 14 months before her death and left explicit instructions for its reading. It is addressed to her immediate family. He looked around the table. He broke the seal. And then he read. If you have ever watched a room full of people realize simultaneously that the story they've been told about someone is not the true one, you know what the air does. It doesn't simply go quiet. It changes density. It becomes something you can feel against your skin. Martin Fielding read in a clear and unhurried voice, and Nana Rose's words, which were precise and direct and entirely without performance, filled the dining room of the house where my sister had spent 4 years constructing her version of me. Nana Rose began with love, because she was always honest about where things came from. She wrote about the family she had raised and the women her granddaughters had become. She wrote one paragraph about Renee, acknowledging her capability, her organization, the real and evident love she had for her family. She wrote it without cruelty and without qualification and without the word but. She was specific and she was fair and she gave Renee exactly what Renee deserved, which was recognition without inflation. Then she wrote about me. She wrote that she had watched me for the last decade of her life with a particular quality of attention. She wrote that she had watched me make choices that looked, from the outside, like struggles, and that she had understood them to be the opposite. She wrote that the kind of strength that doesn't announce itself is the hardest kind to sustain and the easiest kind for other people to mistake for weakness. She wrote, Camille has never once asked this family to believe in her. She has simply kept going. And that, in my experience, is the only thing that has ever meant anything. The room was silent. Lily was looking at her hands. Maya was looking at me. My mother had pressed 2 fingers to her mouth and was staring at the envelope. Martin Fielding continued. There was a financial provision. Nana Rose had set aside $87,000 in a separate trust, held by Fielding's firm, to be released to me on this date, the 4th anniversary of her death. The money had been accumulating interest since the year she died. She had not put it in the general estate, which had been divided equally between my mother's line and her other children. She had set it aside deliberately, separately, in a manner that was entirely hers to decide. "The money is not a rescue," she had written. "It is an investment in work I have already watched begin." I wanted Camille to have the freedom to finish what she started without having to justify it to anyone who cannot yet see what I can already see. Martin Fielding turned the page. And then he read the final section. "I want to be direct about one thing," Nana Rose had written. "Because I am not a woman who benefits from being indirect when it matters. 2 years before my death, I spoke privately with Renee. I asked her, plainly and without accusation, to stop telling Camille's daughters that their mother's choices were a source of concern. I told her that what she was doing was not love, regardless of how she framed it to herself, and that the person most harmed by it was not Camille, who is well equipped to handle difficulty, but Maya and Lily, who were learning to see their mother through someone else's disappointment." Renee agreed to stop. "I am writing this because I want it documented that the agreement was made and that it was, by my observation in the 2 years that followed, not honored. I am not writing it to punish Renee. I am writing it because the people in this room deserve to know what actually happened in private so that the public record is accurate. I have always believed in accurate records." Martin Fielding closed the letter, set it on the table, and folded his hands. He did not look at Renee. He did not look at anyone in particular. He simply allowed the room to do what rooms do when a truth that has been withheld is finally spoken in them. If you've ever sat in a moment like that, where everything that was said in secret has just been said out loud and there is no way to put it back, hit that subscribe button right now and turn on notifications so you never miss a story like this one. Your support means everything and it's what keeps me here bringing you moments like this one. Now stay with me, because what happened next in that room is something I will never forget. Renee did not cry. I want to be clear about that because I think some part of her knew that crying would not work in this room the way it had worked in others, because the document had just established, in writing, in a dead woman's handwriting, read aloud by an attorney in front of everyone she had ever performed for, that she had been asked to stop and had chosen not to. Crying required sympathy from a room that was still processing the news that its sympathy had been misdirected for years. What Renee did instead was go very still. She sat in her chair at the head of her dining table in her decorated house with her string quartet and her coordinated ornaments and her catered spread, and she sat completely still for approximately 8 seconds. I counted. Then she said, her voice controlled but carrying the specific thinness of a structure under load, "Mother made that provision without telling any of us. Without discussing it as a family." I looked at her. I kept my hands flat on the table. I kept my voice exactly as measured as hers. "She discussed it with her attorney," I said. That was enough. A silence. Derek, to his credit, said nothing. He was looking at the table. Aunt Patricia had set down her wine glass at some point during the reading and had not picked it up again. My mother said, in a voice I had not heard from her in years, the voice she used when we were children and something had gone genuinely wrong, "Renee, she asked you to stop." Renee turned to her. "Mom, I was trying to help." My mother looked at her daughter for a long moment. The kind of look that holds a whole history of choosing to believe a more comfortable version of things. Then she said, quietly and without drama, "The letter says otherwise." That was all. It was enough. I looked at my daughters across the table. Maya was watching me with an expression I recognized because I have seen it in mirrors. It was the expression of a person who has held a truth for a long time and has just watched the room catch up to it. Lily was watching Renee with the candid, unguarded attention of a 13-year-old who is doing real-time arithmetic about the people she has been told to trust. I looked at Renee. Her composure was intact, but it had the quality of something that is intact because it is rigid rather than because it is strong. She was sitting inside everything she had built in this house, the perfect tree and the warm light and the coordinated table and the years of Sunday dinners and careful commentary, and she was understanding for the first time that none of it had the power she believed it did. That the room she controlled was not the only room that mattered. That there had been another room, with another record, and that record had just walked through her front door in a weathered briefcase and broken the seal on everything she assumed was settled. Martin Fielding stood, shook hands with me, nodded at my mother, and left. The front door closed behind him with a sound that was not dramatic, just the sound of a door closing, but it landed in the room like punctuation. The string quartet had not played a note since the reading began. One of the musicians, a young woman with dark hair and a viola, looked at the others with a question in her expression. No one gave them a signal to continue. The evening had moved past the point where a string quartet could help it. I stood up. I said, "Thank you for having us, Renee. The house is beautiful, as always." I meant it. I picked up my cardigan from the back of my chair. I looked at my daughters. Maya was already pushing back her seat. Lily slid off her chair and came to stand beside me and tucked her hand into mine without being asked. I looked at Renee one last time. She was still seated. Her eyes were on the tablecloth. I had a line ready. I had been carrying it for 4 years, turning it over and over the way you turn a stone in your pocket until it is smooth. I said it quietly enough that only the people at the table heard it. It wasn't my book that needed proving, Renee. It was yours. She didn't answer. I didn't need her to. I walked my daughters to the car. The drive home from Renee's house on Christmas Eve took 11 minutes. Nobody spoke for the first 8. Lily still had her hand in mine across the center console. Maya watched the dark streets move past the window with the quiet of a person reorganizing things internally. When we turned onto Birch Street, she said, without looking away from the glass, "She told me you'd never finish it." The book. She said it like a fact. Not mean, just certain. I kept my eyes on the road. When did she say that? Lily's birthday. 2 years ago. I was helping clear plates in the kitchen and she was rinsing glasses and she just said it. Like she was telling me something I needed to know. I pulled into the driveway and cut the engine and we sat there for a moment in the dark with the porch light on and the house waiting. "I'm sorry she told you that," I said. Maya turned to look at me. "I'm not." I said it back to myself every time I doubted you. I had no words for that. Some things your children do for you that you never asked them to do, that you didn't know they were doing, that cost them something quiet and private and real. I reached over and held the back of her head for a moment the way I did when she was small. Then we went inside. The weeks that followed had a different quality to them than anything I'd felt in years. Not triumphant, not loud. Just clear. The way air feels after a long rain when the pressure finally lifts and everything is exactly itself again. My mother called on the 26th. She did not make excuses for Renee and she did not ask me to. She said, I should have paid closer attention. I told her she was paying attention now. She asked if she could take the girls for New Year's Eve, just the 3 of them, dinner and a film and the kind of uncomplicated grandmother time that had gotten crowded out by the business of the larger family. I said yes. She paused before she hung up and said, "Your grandmother was right about you, Camille. She always was." I thanked her and held the phone for a while after the call ended. Renee did not call. I did not expect her to, not right away. What I received instead, on the 30th of December, was a text message. 11 words. I didn't realize how much damage I was doing. That was all. No apology attached, no request for a response, no performance of remorse designed to reopen the relationship on her terms. Just 11 words left in the space between us like something set down carefully. I read it twice. Then I put the phone face down on the counter and made dinner. I was not ready to answer and I did not pretend to be. Readiness is not the same as forgiveness and I have stopped treating them as interchangeable. Derek called Josephine, of all people, 2 days into the new year. He had found her number through a mutual contact. He told her he'd had no idea about the conversations with the girls. That he wished he'd asked more questions over the years instead of assuming peace was the same as fairness. Josephine told me this over the phone and said, he sounded genuinely embarrassed. The kind of embarrassed that costs something. I believed it. Derek is not a cruel man. He is a man who outsourced his moral attention to his wife for 11 years and is now doing the uncomfortable arithmetic of what that cost other people. Aunt Patricia sent a card. Handwritten, 3 sentences. She said she had spent 30 years believing the story Renee told about our family because it was the easiest story to be inside. She said she intended to do better. I kept the card in my desk drawer next to the mortgage notebook with its 64 check marks. Martin Fielding transferred the trust funds the second week of January. $87,000 and 4 years of accrued interest. I sat with my accountant for 2 hours and we talked about what it could do. I paid off the remaining balance on the Birch Street mortgage in a single transfer. I set aside a college fund contribution for each of the girls. And I kept the rest in savings and let it sit there, not because I didn't know what to do with it but because I wanted to feel, for a little while, the specific freedom of having enough. Of not calculating. Of moving through a week without the quiet background hum of financial arithmetic that had been running beneath everything else for 6 years. It felt like a room I'd never been in before. I wanted to learn its dimensions before I started furnishing it. Aldrich Press confirmed a publication date in the spring of the following year. My editor, a woman named Diane who speaks in complete sentences and asks questions that take a week to answer properly, called to discuss the cover. We spent 40 minutes on a Tuesday afternoon talking about the image and what it needed to convey, and when we hung up I realized I had just spent 40 minutes talking about my work with someone who had read it and understood it and wanted it to exist in the world. I sat with that for a long time. Maya asked me once, in January, whether I was angry at Aunt Renee. I thought about it honestly before I answered. I told her I had been, for years, but that anger kept as long as I'd kept mine has a way of becoming something quieter. Not forgiveness, not yet, maybe not ever in the full sense. But something less sharp. Something I could set down and leave in a room without needing to carry it out again. Maya nodded. She said, I think I'm still angry for you. I told her that was allowed. That loving someone means sometimes holding the weight they've put down so they don't have to pick it back up again. She thought about that. Then she said, your book is going to change something for someone. I know it. I looked at my daughter, 16 years old, sharp and certain and entirely her own person, and I thought about every year I had spent being told quietly that my choices were a disappointment, that my potential had been wasted, that my daughters deserved a different version of their mother than the one I was. I thought about the letter and the sealed wax and a woman who built me a safety net in secret and asked only that I wait for the right room. I thought about Maya in the kitchen saying I said it back to myself every time I doubted you. You do not waste a life by building it slowly. You do not waste a life by refusing to build it in a shape other people recognize. I am 39 years old. I own my house. My book has a publication date. My daughters know who I am. That is not a failure. That is the whole point. Thank you so much for watching until the end. If you loved this story, check out the other videos on your screen now. I think you'll really enjoy them. And don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already. See you in the next story.